Thanks for spending some time with me. Listen, there are times when you can do immigration work on your own. For instance, if you have an employment card that you want to extend, you can probably do that on your own. If you have a green card that's, it's the serious 10-year green card, but now it's about to expire, you could probably do that on your own too. But in most situations, you really should use an immigration attorney. Immigration law is very complex, it's very nuanced. I know everybody says that, yeah, you're a lawyer, of course you want them to use lawyers. Yeah, because I have seen what happens sometimes when they don't use lawyers. They do it by themselves, or worse, they get advice from some notario. You really, for certain things, such as number one, if you're in removal proceedings, you need an immigration attorney. Listen, if you don't have an immigration attorney and your hearing is coming up, let's say it's, tomorrow, let's say it's next week, and you still don't have an attorney, you must attend that hearing, okay, no matter what. Whether you have an attorney or you don't, you need to show up. And the court, generally speaking, will give you more time. They'll give you like a continuance. And it used to be you got like a 2-3 month continuance. The last I heard, it was up to about a year's continuance because the courts are just overwhelmed. It's ridiculous. But anyway, you have to show up. For that second hearing, after the judge has cut your break and they gave you a little bit more time, wonderful, you have to show up with an attorney, okay? However, unlike criminal court, you don't get a public defender. You're going to have to pay for your own attorney. Usually that's a private attorney. Some nonprofits, accredited reps, they'll go with you to court, but you have to apply for an attorney from from the accredited rep. You have to meet certain low-income thresholds. They don't just accept any old person. And plus, you need time to prepare whatever your defense is going to be. The attorney needs time for that. So, number one, you need an attorney for removal proceedings. Listen, immigration, the government, is represented by trained professional immigration attorneys. You walk in there without one, or you got the cheapest one you could find because he just started his practice and, you're hoping for the best. You get what you pay for, generally speaking. Not always, but generally speaking, you get what you pay for. You need somebody who knows what the possible solutions are for you. Sometimes there's nothing. Sometimes the best you're going to get is voluntary departure so that you don't have that black mark of deportation against you. But a lot of times there's possibilities that the more experienced the immigration attorney, the better luck you're going to have. So keep that in mind, that it's very, very important if you're in removal proceedings. Another example is if you entered without inspection and now you're thinking that, you've heard that there might be something that you can do to do your case, blah, 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 blah. Listen, if you entered without inspection, there's not a whole lot people could do. It depends. Depends on the situation. It depends if you've been a victim of a crime. There's a possibility there. If you need to apply for asylum, there's a possibility there. But generally speaking, before you send anything into immigration on your own, at least have a consultation with an immigration attorney. Because the fact that you entered without inspection, without a visa, is a problem, generally speaking. Now, I just mentioned asylum. When someone comes into this country seeking asylum, they have 1 year to apply. If they don't apply within that first year, there are some exceptions, but you better have some darn good excuses as to why you didn't apply. So when it comes to asylum, I think it's very important. This is something that a lot of people go to notaries for, or they'll be like some church group that is helping people file their asylum applications. Look, an experienced immigration attorney knows how to put together an asylum application. Obviously, you need to fill out the form, but you also need a declaration, a statement, your story. What is your story, right? That should be at least 5 pages long, in my ever so humble opinion. You need country conditions. Let's say you're applying for asylum based on having been persecuted because of your religion. Well, you better present some kind of proof that you're a member of whatever that religious group is. You can't just say, yeah, and put it in your big long statement about how you went to church and you did this and you did that, blah, 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 blah. And you never submit a letter, some kind of membership card. Same thing for political asylum. If it's because you were a union member, present the union card, right? There's all these things that people who have done a lot of asylum, they already know. Where if you're trying to do it on your own, you're going to forget things that you weren't even aware that you were supposed to be doing. These are things that an experienced immigration attorney can help you with. Another thing, which it's been all over the news, is if you have a prior deportation or removal order, don't file anything on your own. If you've already been ordered deported, don't file anything. Go see an attorney who knows what they're talking about. He might be able to help you reopen your case or challenge the orders. There's things that he or she might be able to do. Don't mess with it, because believe me, they'll come knocking at your door. Because if you just alerted them, oh, by the way, I have a deportation order, but I'm going to reopen it, and this is where I live, because you have to put down where you live. Bad idea. Kind of related to this is if you have any kind of criminal conviction. And I mean any criminal conviction. Simple assault, maybe some shoplifting, a DUI, even if you're a permanent resident. Look, when somebody says to me they want to file for naturalization, I often tell them, if you have a clean record and nothing's much changed, you can speak English, you can read and write English, you can do the naturalization on your own. However, if they've had any kind of a criminal problem, even if they've had something that's qualified here in Pennsylvania, we call it ARD, but it's like a first offender program where, because it's the first time you've had a problem, you were able to do some community service. You go through a year and they'll write it off. They'll basically write off your case for you and expunge it. That's still a criminal conviction. Now, for immigration purposes, it's not supposed to be considered a criminal conviction if you went through a first offender program. But I've been in more naturalization interviews to know that, yes, they do consider that. Some people, again, depends on who you get. So if you have had any kind of criminal conviction at all, before you decide to file for asylum on your own or petition for somebody else, make sure you go see an immigration attorney, because it's kind of nuanced. I'll get into that later in some other video about if you're applying for somebody else and you have a certain kind of criminal conviction, you could end up with a big problem. Connected to this kind of is if you have a complicated immigration history, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Let me take a look at my notes here. People with complicated immigration history. Multiple entries, prior visits, prior petitions, Maybe you had applied for a visa, got denied. Maybe, like one beautiful example is somebody who their husband applied for them, and then it came out at the interview that the husband said, well, I was just kind of helping her out. She was somebody I worked with, and because they could put a lot of pressure on the U.S. citizen, right, if they think there's fraud involved. Well, now and maybe there was some fraud with that. But that was a long time ago. And now it's 3, 4, 5 years later. Now you have found Mr. Wonderful. You really do love him. You really do have a great relationship. And he's going to apply for you. And it'll be fine. It's not going to be fine. It's not going to be fine. So if they find out, which they will, because they'll look at your alien file, if they find out that you've been accused of marriage fraud before, you could very, very well have a big problem trying to get the second marriage petition through. And in this environment, they might put you show up for your interview, they could very well put you in deport. So another group of people that really should consider, again, at least a consul, okay, are people who are applying for permanent residence, particularly family members of U.S. citizens or permanent residents who have been here illegally. You need to talk to somebody. Again, you might not hire the person. You might want to have 2 or 3 different consultations with different attorneys, see if there's somebody you like better than the rest of them. But if you've been here illegally, where you've overstayed your visa, or worse, you came in without a visa, you just crossed the border someplace, you need to talk to a lawyer about whether or not you can actually apply for this. In addition to getting residence based on being married to a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, you can also get a green card based on employment. Let's say you're here on an H or an L. If you have an attorney, which you probably already do, because most people who are here on business visas, either they have an attorney or the employer has an attorney. They can help you with extensions, and they can help you go through this timetable to make sure that you don't run out of time and you can remain in this country in legal status while you're applying for adjustment of status. But again, you need to talk to an attorney about that. Another group, DACA recipients who want to adjust status. Maybe you were a DACA recipient and you managed to go home and you got paroled back in. You might be able to, marry somebody that you're in love with and living with, and then adjust status through that petition. However, again, especially with this Trump administration, I'm just saying, I'm not going to say pros or cons, which is bullshit, because I'd like to strangle this man. But with this administration, they're trying to do everything they can to screw you up. So be very, very careful. Make sure you have an attorney before. I wouldn't do it by yourself. Just about anything. In fact, if you hear this whole list, there's a whole list. It's like DACA recipients who want to adjust status, people applying for green cards through VAWA, which is Violence Against Women Act, which, by the way, that's for spouses, not just spouses, but generally speaking, it's for spouses of U.S. citizens and permanent residents. Doesn't have to be the woman who's the abused one. The guy can be abused too. So that is sort of up there with asylum, where you need a lot of evidence for this type of a case. You want to have somebody who can help you, who's used to putting together these packages. And, maybe he's had 1 or 2 cases rejected, and he's learned. Okay, well, they didn't like this, but they'll like that, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how you do everything. Special immigrant juvenile. Okay. Special immigrant juvenile applicants This involves not just immigration court, but it also involves family court. So you could very well need 2 attorneys. I've done 3, 4 of them where I actually went to family court. I've done more of them where I just had my client talk to a family attorney and have them do it. For the same reason. I could do it in family court. However, it's not going to be as seamless as a family court lawyer who knows exactly what needs to be done. I could do it based on what I did before, but it's sort of better if you have a family court lawyer do the first part of it and then go back to your immigration attorney and file, have that immigration attorney help you with the filing of an SIJ application. Applying for temporary protected status. It seems like a certain somebody has terminated TPS for a lot of people, but there are still a lot of countries whose nationals are able to apply for temporary protected status. So it's just like with asylum, it's just like with VAWA. There's a way to do this, and you really should use an attorney to do it. Once a country is designated for TPS, the notarios come out of the woodwork, because here, we're going to make some good money. We're going to make some good money. And look, you can do what you want, but my position on notarios. They're practicing law without a license. They're not allowed to do it. And it's not because, I'm going to tell you one quick thing, and then I have to stop doing war stories. But when I was a paralegal, I used to hear one attorney in particular, one partner, I used to hear him pitch and complain all the time about the notarios. He was so furious. And I sat there and I'm thinking, yeah, because they're cheap competition, right? That's what you're pissed off about, really. So anyway, I was a paralegal while I was going to law school at night. And then finally, I take the bar, pass it the very first time, thank you, Jesus, and I become my own attorney, and I decided that I was going to go off on my own, and that was the whole idea. I was going to practice up in a northeast section of Philadelphia where my mom and dad lived, and they weren't in the best of health. So I open up my little office. I start getting people coming in, and I start seeing what some of these notarios had done to these people. There were 3 or 4 of them up in the Northeast because there weren't any real honest-to-God immigration attorneys up there. Nobody was up there. Just me. So I started to see, the problems that they caused for people, the things they had people swearing to and signing off on, the missed deadlines, oh my God. And that conversation with that old partner, Larry Rudnick was his name, came back to me, and I thought, See, it wasn't just because, the people can get it done cheaper, so that's why Larry doesn't like it. No, it's because they really screw stuff up. Now, look, for the cases that they don't screw up, I never saw them because they got approved. But I saw the ones that did not get approved, which then down the road causes even more problems. So, same thing with TPS. What else do I have here? People have been accused of immigration fraud or misrepresentation. That's right up there with if you've said you've had marriage fraud. Marriage fraud is really bad. Having voted in an election, very bad. But look, sometimes it's a permanent bar, and sometimes there's waivers available. So if you see you get a decision where your case is denied, and they're saying that it's because of misrepresentation or fraud, go see an attorney. You should have seen an attorney beforehand. But go see an attorney and see if they can do something to help you. Maybe to have them reconsider that decision. Because you're not going to be able to handle on your own. So another important group, people who have previously had a green card application or a naturalization application denied. It's important. One of the things that an attorney would do, but I don't think you would generally do on your own, is I would do a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, where I have a request to get a copy of the alien file so that you can see exactly what immigration has on you. Some things they block out, but generally speaking, you get a lot of the file. You get to see exactly what was filed, because a lot of times my clients, if they've had somebody else do it for them or they did it on their own, they don't keep copies of stuff. It's ridiculous. But now I've also heard that recently FOIAs took about 4 months, 5 months, not a big deal. Recently, they're taking like a year. In fact, sometimes they're just being ignored. So that's evolving. That's just one more way that a certain somebody can slow things down and make things difficult for immigrants. Anyway, an immigration attorney will know where they're at. You know, when you decide, I want to get a copy of my alien file, an immigration attorney should know, at least can find out for you what's going on and how long should it take. Well, this is another one. People whose sponsor has died or become unavailable. I would definitely use an attorney for that, because I had to do that for somebody. That was a pain in the butt, because I hadn't done it before. This is going back maybe 4 or 5 years. I had never done something like that before. But there are solutions to doing that. If I get a case like that, like if I got a case like that today, where somebody's husband died, well, that I could do. The husband I could do. But if it was a mother who petitioned for her adult son, and then mom dies, I would probably refer that out to somebody else, because the last time I did something like that, it just took a long time, and I wasn't comfortable with it. So, by the way, this is in, I'm going to put this in my thing about who should you hire and what kind of questions should you ask a lawyer. You should ask them. One of the questions you should always ask them at your consult is, how many cases like mine have you had? And pray that they tell you an honest answer. For something like that, where the sponsor has died or become unavailable, not everybody's done those things, right? And then the last thing I'm going to talk about are people who need a waiver of inadmissibility. Waivers of inadmissibility, that just means you're not admittable. They don't think you qualify to be admitted into the country. Even if you're physically here, legally, they don't want to admit you. That video is for a whole different day, okay? But if you see that you're doing your Google search and it says it's possible that you could have a waiver of inadmissibility, you need to go see an attorney. And I don't mean an attorney who just started and he's still wet behind the ears and he's only had, he says, oh, I've been doing this for a year and a half. I know what I'm doing. He doesn't know waivers of inadmissibility. I can almost guarantee you. So, anyway, like I said, there are some times when you can do it by yourself, but generally speaking, there's so many times, as I just went through that big long list, when you really should use an attorney. I know, it sounds like an attorney saying, oh yeah, you need an attorney, but this is, I used to say this all the time. You have a doctor, you have a medical issue, you have problems with your eyes. You don't want a foot doctor to be working on your eyes, right? You don't want somebody who's thinking about going to medical school but hasn't gone yet, working on your eyes. If you need a professional, hire a professional. And you can also check out my video that talks about how do you find an attorney and what should they charge. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.